Recording. Okay. Awesome. So, good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever you are, and welcome to the July edition of the Analytics Tug. And so, as usual, let's tell you what makes this tug a bit different. Essentially, we're dedicated to learning all about Tableau, analytics, and it takes place virtually almost every month. So when you come here, you can expect to learn about Tableau's analytical functions, the entire platform in Tableau desktop, web edit, everything cool that comes with Tableau. All about analytics all the time. And from time to time, whenever there are new features in the software, we're gonna get some Tableau team members to come on board, kind of talk to us about it, give an introduction before we get to see it in the release. Of course, you can subscribe to our Bevy group. That way, you keep in touch with all the events. You can RSVP, and you can also check out the forums page as well to keep up with that. So we're going to introduce the leaders, Annabelle, Prasan, and myself. First off, we have Annabelle. She's a visual analytics and enablement lead. She's also a Tableau visionary, Tableau ambassador, and a Tableau certified professional. Her contact information is up there. She's got a blog, which you can check out, radicus.wordpress.com, and Twitter, Rincon Annabelle. Her passions are Tableau, her dog, and chocolate, and she's located in Zurich, Switzerland. And apart from what she's got going on here for this tug, she also co-leads the Data Plus Women in Zurich. And you can use the QR codes to get to their page and register. So you can also keep up to date with their events on that side. Lots of great stuff going on there. And next we have Prasan. Prasan fell in love with Tableau and the data fam. And essentially, if you know about Prasan, you know he's all about giving back. And his current endeavors right now, he's founded the Tableau Buddy, where he essentially focuses on helping newcomers into the field kind of get a good leg up and quickly ascend into greatness. And also Vizdana, which kind of does some of the same stuff, just kind of teaching, sharing knowledge, mentoring, etc., etc. Prasan is also a Tableau visionary and ambassador. And in terms of his journey, he started using Tableau in 2020, same as me. So we kind of have that like joint anniversary, I guess. He currently works as a senior BI engineer at Emirates MBD. He has a strong sense of community and building and mentoring, which, that's, if you follow him, all of this stuff. And currently he's mentored over 500 plus data professionals. That number actually keeps growing every day. So I'm sure at some point we're going to need to update it because it's a lot more. In terms of, what Prasan likes, aside from the work stuff, he loves cat, food, and anime. And these are three things that he can definitely die for. But we hope you don't die because we love you. Okay, Prasan? As far as myself, I do freelance and contract database for a bunch of clients, retail, media, higher education, finance, startups, and much more via Visite Analytics. I'm also a visionary and ambassador. In terms of my Tableau journey, started in 2020, fell in love, and I just kind of went all in. I've been really blessed to have like 12 Visit of the Day recipients, recognitions. Apart from this tug, I also co-lead Makeover Monday. I love to participate in Makeover Monday and a bunch of other challenges, so I can just like share stuff with the data fam. That's kind of my thing. In terms of like my strategy for Tableau and what I do, I believe in functional aesthetics. So it's got to look good. It's got to be functional. And that way, people are more receptive to what's being shown there. Fun fact, Viz junkie. So I always need to have Tableau going. Even when you don't see me posting, I'm more than likely doing stuff on the side. Another fun fact, I'm currently tied with Kevin Flerlodge for like the most busy awards won, which is again, another blessing, which I'm super happy for. There's 6 in total. No longer eligible, so I'm pretty sure that number is going to stay like that. Apart from the work stuff, I like watching documentaries. Occasionally, I'll try to play a melody on the keyboard, get something cool going. And I really like working out. I just kind of set up my gym on my balcony, so that way I have it right close to me. I don't have to go anywhere to get my fitness, fix. Ground rules for today and every month. Essentially, please interact, chat, do whatever you want to do via the chat section. But if you got questions which you want to direct to the speakers, please utilize the Q&A because the chat moves so quickly and we don't want to miss what you've got there. Plus, others can get to see the answers and kind of keep track of those. The only rule that we have, enjoy. The session is being recorded. And so when it's all done, it's going to get posted to YouTube and you can rewatch it, pick out things that you found awesome, and essentially just go over as many times as you want to. We also have a Twitter page at Analytics TUG. So please go there, show us some love. We would love to hear whatever you have for us. In terms of the agenda, I've kind of gone through the welcome session, and then we're going to have three awesome speakers for you today. First, we have Kayla Swain and Agata, where they're going to talk about, mastering dates in Tableau. And then we're going to have Scott Eaton, who is going to go through documentation for dashboards, which is really helpful, in terms of, that the other aspects that are not actually building and visiting and developing. And then finally, we're going to have Sherzodbek talking about understanding and identifying and how to handle outliers in Tableau. And of course, through all of this, you're free to post your questions. And, we're going to do our best to answer them alongside with the speakers. And now I'm going to pass it over to Prasan to bring in our awesome speakers for today.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Chimdi, for the great introduction as ever. Okay, coming on to the speakers, I have our great speakers. I know some from LinkedIn, from their great visualizations, and some I have also met in person. So that's awesome. So first we have Kayla. You can follow her at the Twitter handle Kayla Meets Data. She learned Tableau while in graduate school, and she is currently working as a BI analyst at Arkwell Health. And it's a healthcare startup focused on value-based care, where she's most excited to see data-driven decisions. Her Tableau journey, she co-leads the San Diego Tableau user group. We had an awesome hosting event before the Tableau conference. Thank you again, Kayla, for that. That was really awesome, well organized. We really enjoyed it. And she participates in various community challenges, including Make Home Monday, Du Bois Challenge, and Data Plus Music. And she has received 2 times Viz of the Day. Fun fact about her, outside of Tableau, she loves all things music and can even be spotted around San Diego. That's nice. And she is practicing her DJ skills. Maybe someday we'll have her for her DJ skills as well here. And she's going to present No Day Like Today to Master Dates in Tableau. This session was also presented in Tableau conference this year, along with Agata. She builds really great visualizations. Before I even go through the slide, I just want to say her like the palettes she used, it's really awesome. I love that. And you can follow her on Twitter at Agata Viz. She first discovered Tableau in 2016 and hasn't looked back. As a BI and data visualization analyst at Gannett, she loves helping business stakeholders find insight in their data in a visually appealing way. One of the most important thing I see here about her Tableau journey, she has got 8 times VOTD. Her Wordle Viz was top 15 in the 2023 Iron Viz and has almost completed Mako Monday Challenge in 2020. That's really awesome. And also, she leads the new Tableau user group and Northern New England user group. Tableau user public user group also won a Vizzy this year. Please do follow that user group as well. They have got great content coming over there. And fun fact about her, when she's not visiting, Agatha can be found adventuring with a family near her home in southern Maine.
Sorry.
So now I hand over to both of you. Thank you for coming.
I'm going to stop sharing now.
Yep.
All right, well, we will get started. Thanks, Prasan, for those introductions. Thanks to the rest of the Analytics TUG leadership team for having us present today. Before I start, can you hear me okay? All right. So Agata and I came up with the idea for this presentation after about a year or so of working together on client projects. And we noticed dates were a very frequent area of troubleshooting for us. So we really, came up with this out of our own experience. And we figured it'd be helpful to have a resource that addresses common date challenges that we came across, like end of year updates, and particularly displaying multiple date periods for comparisons in one view. So we'll jump. Well, you kind of already introed us. So everything that Prasan just said in our intro. Agata, if you're talking, you're muted.
I couldn't see the screen. This is fun. All right, here we go. Let's try this again. All right, so we are going to start by reviewing Tableau's out-of-the-box date filters and a few of the most common date functions. We'll go over choosing a reference date. So whether that's today, the most recent date in your data, or giving your users the ability to select a custom date. We will then discuss alternative ways to filter dates. And we'll talk about missing data and what to do about it. And we'll wrap up with a few of our favorite date-related tips and tricks. So we're going to get started with Tableau's out-of-the-box date filters. There are basically two categories of date filters, continuous and discrete. Continuous filters will filter out data based on date ranges. So think year-to-date, last month, or this week. And discrete filters, on the other hand, will filter out date parts. So examples are 2024 or April or Q1 2024. So just to kind of show you this, I've built out this KPI and line chart of sales on order using Tableau's sample superstore data. And I will drag order date to the filter shelf, and we will first look at the relative date filter. So across the top here, you will see all your options, right? So kind of defaults to days, but you can choose weeks, months, quarters, or years. I'll just choose months. And then you have even more options here. You can see the previous month, this month, or you can choose the last however many months you want to look at. You can even look at the next few months or month to date. Lots of different options. So the great thing about this filter is that there are so many different options that this filter should make every user able to find what they need. It's also dynamic. So as your data refreshes, your view will also refresh with the most recent data. So if we do something like month to date, tomorrow, if your data refreshes, it'll go through July 26th. So the major drawback to this filter, though, is that all these options are anchored relative to today. And this may not work for all data sources. You can technically change the anchor date right here, but this field isn't dynamic. So this could be very limiting once your workbook is actually published. But if your data refreshes daily, this is definitely a great choice. All right, the next one we'll take a look at is range of dates. This allows you to select the start and end dates of the date range that you'd like to see. So if we just take a look at how this looks, you can just drag these and select whatever date range you want to see. You can also use the little calendar to select the date. What's nice about this one is that it's intuitive for users to use, but it's definitely a little harder, a little more time consuming to set up specific date ranges that you might be reporting on. So things like year to date or quarter to date, when you compare that to the relative date filter. The major drawback with this one is the default range will be set to whatever you select when you publish this workbook. So when the data refreshes, these date ranges won't update. Starting date and ending date are really two additional versions of the range of dates option, and these might be handy for some use cases. So with starting date, you have the ability to change the start date of your date range, but the end date is fixed to the maximum date in your data. Ending date, very similar, but here you're able to change the end date, and the start date is fixed to the minimum date in data. The last option in our continuous filters, you'll notice it's not here. It's a little hard to find. Don't ask me why, I have no idea. It's only available if you actually click this little down arrow here, and you can select browse periods. So this filter just has these 6 options: 1 day, 1 week, 1 month, 3 months, 1 year, or 5 years. And again, this is anchored relative to today. It's super hard to find, and I didn't actually know this existed until we started creating this presentation. So that kind of gives you an idea of how much I've used this. But if those 6 options work for you, this could be a great choice. All right, so now I will move over to the discrete date filters. And here I have this one set to month and year, but you can select any date part that's relevant to you. You can select years, quarters, months, or individual dates. I definitely use this sort of filter a lot, mainly when I'm exploring my data. What's great about this is that you can actually set it to single or multi-select. And this is one of the very few options where you could, if you needed to, select non-consecutive dates. So this is nice and easy, but it is limited to the date part that you selected. Once you publish this, you can't then change it to, like, if you just wanted to see years or something like that. And once the dashboard is published, it will default to whatever you had selected when you published the dashboard. So out of the box, Tableau provides a lot of different options for filtering dates. But for more complex dashboards, or when you're trying to visualize different periods of time in one worksheet, you may need to use an alternative technique. And we'll share a few of those in a few minutes. But first, Kayla will review some common date functions. Oh, I'm having some sharing issues. Okay, here we go.
So to display multiple period analysis in one worksheet, you may need to create calculations that are defined to your specific time periods, such as year-to-date sales, prior year-to-date, current month profit, or prior month profit. A common example that we've come across for this are, let's say, leadership scorecards, where leadership will want to see their metrics through different time periods, or KPIs with prior year benchmark comparisons. So to create these calculations, these are a few of the date functions that we use pretty often. So the first one listed here is date trunc. And as the name implies, this function truncates the date to the starting date of the specified date part. So Tableau describes this as sort of rounding to a date part. So for example, in our table here, the second column, we round the order date to the quarter. Since the quarter is Q1, it returns the first date of Q1. In our next column, the date part we're interested in here is month. So our order date is rounded to January 1st, or if it's, let's say, the date's February 6th, that rounds to February 1st. I use this function often when creating calcs that determine current period or prior period calculations. Agata, could you jump to the next tab? Thanks. So let's say that our user wants to select Q1 2024 as our current period. We have a parameter here that allows them to select this quarter. The pink represents that what we've decided is our current period. So first, of course, we created this parameter, and you'll see that I formatted the first date of each to display Q1, the letter Q, as the prefix. And then we can create a calculation, like the calculation listed here above, that will select that quarter based on our selection. And if we hop to the next, perfect. And so another kind of cool use case for using date trunc is that you can kind of create a view where there's a dynamic date, granularity. So I've used parameters assigned to a worksheet here to be able to change our graph from week, month, and quarter. And you can see the calculation used below that, where we're using that date trunk at the week, month, and quarter to be able to dynamically change that based on the parameter. And the next one is date add. This allows you to add a specified number of date parts to your starting date. You could define the date part as month, year, or weeks, depending on what you want to add. And then you can also use negative numbers to subtract. An example use case of this is wanting to compare current month to prior month. So I've used this date add along kind of nested inside of a date trunk to be able to highlight those prior months in blue. Date diff, this calculation returns the number of date parts between two dates. So in our previous example, we used the date add to highlight prior month, current month. But let's say instead of a specific month, your users want to define the period by, let's say, last 30 days or last 31 days. Since this potentially could cross over 2 months, we won't be able to use the date trunk function to define this period. So in this case, I would use the date diff function to return true if the difference is between today's date and the order date is 31 days or less. We will discuss the today function more in a little bit. Tableau also has functions that allow you to extract date parts using a date part calculation, which returns a specified date part as an integer, and then date name allows you to return a specified date part as a string. These are useful as well, but I would just be careful. Remember, if you do aggregate using these functions, it will aggregate across the date parts. For example, if you aggregate sales for date part equals June, it'll aggregate June from every year in your data set. So you want to make sure that you're using that appropriately based on your user requirements. So now that we've brushed up on some helpful functions for creating time periods for calculations, let's talk about different options for anchoring these time periods. So often when displaying data, you'll want to show data through a certain relative date, or maybe you only want to view data through the most completed week or the most completed month. Sometimes users will want complete flexibility to choose their anchor dates. So when deciding, the first thing that I think is really important is to understand how your data treats, how dates are treated in your underlying data. In some cases, data may only be available through a previous month or a previous week, or your data may be forward-looking past your current date. Also, I think it's important to know, when does your data update? Is it daily, monthly? Just so you can understand how to best set up your calculations to account for your data source. So an example that we're looking at, you can go back. So in this example shown here, so our data extending past today's date, but for our current period calculations, we're only interested in the last 6 months. So we're using a date diff function along with Tableau's today function that equals the current calendar date. And I've created a current period calculation that returns true if the date is within the last 6 months from today. So this is kind of a way to override the fact that our data extends past our current date. And you can jump now. So what if there's a lag in your data source? So meaning, what if your data source is updated, say, monthly, and only has activity for dates through the most recently completed month? In this case, our calculation would return only 5 months, because it's sort of looking for that current month of July when it's calculating out 6 months. Now, we could adjust our date diff criteria to account for this, or alternatively, we can anchor our time period to the max date available in the data source. So in this example, there you go, thanks. In this example, we've replaced that today function with a max date calculation. The curly brackets here represent that this is a fixed LOD calc to return the max date available in our data. Since this is a LOD calc, one thing to keep in mind here is Tableau's order of operations, and be mindful of this if you use context filters in your dashboard. So now in some cases, users will want complete flexibility because of course they do. And so to view time periods, and they may want to view time periods anchored to a date of their choosing. So we can hop to the next one. So in these cases, we can use a parameter to allow users to select their anchor date or end date. In this case, we can update our calculation to reference our date parameter. So in this case, users can add that, update that date parameter, and it'll change our current period. So now that we've reviewed a few options for anchoring your date analysis, I want to touch on an issue that you're bound to come across at some point. Usually for me, it's at the beginning of the year, right after you've come back from holidays, vacations, and your users have opened up the dashboard and all of the data has disappeared. And if you're me, you may be regretting every calculation that you use the date function that's now looking for data in a new year that may not exist in your data source yet. Also, a common request that we've both received is the ability to freeze a dashboard at the beginning of a new year to kind of create a snapshot of the previous year. So if you've used the today function throughout your dashboard, then it becomes a little bit more difficult to create the snapshot, and you'll need to make sure you update each calculation where you're using like a today function. So there are a few tips as well as alternatives to the today function that may make the end of year less painful for you while also allowing you to still compare those dates that you need. The first one being, whichever method that you decide to use, create a separate calculation to perform your date calcs. That way, if you do need to update it at the beginning of the year or even hard code something for like a specific use case, you only have to update it in one place, which is a lot less painful than trying to update a calculation across, 30 calcs as I've done in the past. And that way, the changes will flow through the rest of your dashboard with you only having to update one or two calculations. You can also prepare ahead of time by building in a parameter that allows you to toggle between all of the three options that we've covered. I learned this from Agata, who I'm always learning things from. But this just gives you a ton of flexibility and allows you to pivot quickly and get your users the data that they need without a lot of rework on your end. And speaking of parameters, let's talk about some additional ways that you can incorporate parameters into your analysis.
All right, so in most of the dashboards I create, I end up using parameter filter dates. There are lots of different ways to do this, and I'll just share two methods today. One is on the easier end of the spectrum, and the other one is a little bit more advanced. So we've published a version of this workbook on Tableau Public, and we'll share those links at the end of this presentation. But in that version of the workbook, we've included several more approaches, and there are probably countless ways you could use parameters to dates. So a simple method is to create custom start and end dates for your current period. And then if you need a comparison period, custom start and end dates for that period as well. You can then write two separate calculations, one for your current period and one for your comparison period. And these will return true when the order date is between the two parameters, the two dates in your parameters. So in terms of pros, this is a relatively simple solution that doesn't require very many calculations, and the calculations are pretty straightforward. You can also set up these parameters to update dynamically based on your data as well. So some drawbacks to this method are it is a little clunky. You do have to make 4 separate selections. And then I wouldn't recommend including the comparison period line in the same line chart here. Since users can select any date range possible for that comparison period, depending on what they choose, it could be hard to read if you had both of those lines in the same chart. But for some situations, this is exactly what is needed because the users just need that flexibility of being able to select custom start and end dates for both the current period and the comparison period. So this can definitely work great in some use cases. So this next method has a little bit of everything. First of all, we've incorporated the feature that Kayla just went over. So you can choose the date that the date is relative to. So you can choose today, the most recent date in the data, or you can just choose a custom date as well. We can also choose the period that you're interested in. So here we have week, month, quarter, of year. And you can select whether you're comparing to the previous period or the previous year. And then lastly, we can select whether we're comparing partial period for both current and prior, or complete periods for current and prior, or you can even choose a mix where current is partial and prior is complete. So that's definitely a ton of differences. And I would say that the biggest drawback to this method is that it's not simple. So there are significantly more calculations, and they are more complex than any of the ones we've talked about so far. But the great news is that we've built this out already, and we'll share this workbook so you can download it and copy and tweak the calculations to fit your needs. So this next method I'm going to talk about actually uses table calculations. So I've had quite a few use cases where we needed to view the last 12 months. And then users also wanted to see the prior year's values in the line chart as well. And so to accomplish this, what we actually end up using is the lookup function. So I'll kind of go over how that works real quick. So I built this simple table here with order date, sum of sales, and then this lookup function that I created. And so let me just show that to you real quick. So this is just lookup sum of sales -1. And so that -1 offset here is asking Tableau to give you the value in the prior row. So in our table here, if you look at December 2024, this is December's sales. And then the value giving with the lookup function is the prior month's value. So it's November's value there. So for our line chart here, right now, I just have sum of sales with the order date. And then to show the prior year, what I've done is written lookup sum of sales -12. So that -12 is giving me the prior year's value for that same month. And I'll just drag this here to rows, make this a dual axis, and synchronize my axes. And we have both lines in the chart. So this is the tricky part, right? So if I were to drag order date to filters, use the relative date filter that we discussed earlier, and select the last 12 months, since that's what I want to see, my prior year line would disappear. So that's not going to work. So what we need to do is, I've actually already written this, but I'll just show it to you. What I'm actually going to do is use the lookup function again, but this time with order date and with an offset of 0. And so what happens if I'm basically changing the order date from a dimension to a table calculation. So now if I go to relative dates and choose the last 12 months, both of my lines remain, which is awesome. So, so what happens here is that filters based on table calculations don't filter out the underlying data. They actually just hide it from view. And so definitely a note of caution here. If you have a ton of data, this could impact performance because all that data is in your view. But you could use a dimension filter to filter out the last 2 years just to kind of have less data in the view. And if you're not familiar with Tableau's order of operations, I definitely encourage you to take a look at this. You'll see that table calc filters come last, which is why that worked in our case there. But this is definitely really handy to know this really well. It'll make your life a lot easier down the road. All right, so we've written a whole bunch of different date calculations. And what I do most often to check my calculations is create something like this, where I drag the date that I'm looking at, the the calculation that I'm checking, and then do a whole bunch of scrolling up and down to make sure it's working correctly. It's not super efficient, and I've probably done this way more times than I'd like to admit, but recently somebody shared this great idea with me where you can actually create this simple calendar view. And it makes your life for checking your calculations so much easier. So I've dragged order date here in lots of different ways. So across the top, we have it in years, the weekday. Here we have the quarter, month, and then I also have the week so that it kind of looks more like a calendar. And then onto colors, I've dragged period identifier. So the darker pink is your current period and the lighter pink is your prior period. And this is just a much easier, more visual way of checking to make sure your date calculations are working properly. Now, one of the things I noticed when I created this is all these missing dates, which is a perfect segue into our next topic. Because when I notice something like this, what I normally do is call Kayla in to help me. So that's exactly what I'm going to do. Kayla, what do? We have all this missing data.
Thanks, Agata. So something that we deal with often when trying to display date-related date is that you may have missing data. This basically means that our data source only has records for dates that logged an event or an activity. So using Superstore data as an example, could you hop to the...
Yep.
Sorry, I think it is the next slide after that. I mixed them up.
This one?
Maybe not.
Which one is it?
There we go. Oh, we missed it again. You can go back to the calendar. I could do it from the calendar.
Okay.
So as you saw in the calendar that we had, Agata had some missing spaces. So using Superstore data as an example, if there were no sales on December 25th, then there will be no rows in your data for that particular date. So when displayed, you won't be able to kind of fill that date in. So Tableau does have functions such as infer missing dates or show empty rows. But we wanted to briefly review the concept of date scaffolding as another option to filling your missing dates. And by this method, we mean joining your data source to another table that includes every calendar date that you'll need. So if you could jump to the date dim.
Okay.
Yep. So this type of table may be referred to as a date dim or date dimension table in your data warehouse. So if you are connected to some type of data warehouse, your data engineers may have already created this table and you will be able to connect to it pretty easily. If not, it's pretty easy to create your own in Excel. And so this is just kind of an example of what a date dim table could look like. So I've included every single calendar date, and just some additional information that if you decided to create it in this table, you don't have to necessarily create it as a calculation in Tableau. So I've just included year, month name, day, weekday. You can also include some other kind of cool stuff like, is it a work day, the fiscal year, quarter, etc. And then I've joined that to our data. So I'm pulling in that, sum of profit, sum of sales, and you'll see where there isn't any profit or sales, there's no data there, but we still have that row and we can still refer to that date now that we've included this date table. So if we jump to this one. Okay. So if you look at the top table here for Adam Schillingsberg, let's say we wanted to look at his data from these 7 days. As a lot of times with clients, you may get requests to see what happened over the last 4 weeks or last 6 months, and if you don't have that data, then you don't pull back all of those dates, and you kind of have kind of an incomplete view. So in this view, if you look at the table after the scaffold, we have all of those dates listed, and just for Adam, he just didn't have any data available. So in order to create this, we need to, we can jump to the data source. Yeah. If you open the orders. Right. So you can see here. So the first thing I did was I created a unique customer name Excel spreadsheet. So this basically is just a unique list of every customer. In this case, I did customer because that's the level of detail that I want to be able to view for each date. That may be different for you. One suggestion is to only go down to the smallest level of detail that you need. So if your analysis only happens at a market level or a store level, then I would only go down as far, and that'll help kind of manage the amount of extra data that you end up bringing in. And so you see that I've joined this unique customer name to our date dim, and we're using a 1 of 1, and this is essentially to basically join every customer to every date dim, every row in the date dim table. And then we've joined that back to our superstore and that's where we'll pull in all of our profit information, sales, all of the data that we originally had. And so this is kind of what that table would look like now that we've added that date scaffold. So as you can see in our view here, our users wanted to see last 7 days of sales. I've brought in a few other customers as well now. And you can see that you get a full complete picture with the Monday through Saturday. And you just show blank, or if you want, 0 for where that data doesn't exist. But that allows them to have that complete view. So now, before we wrap up, I think Agata has a few tips to run through.
Yep, just 3 more date-related tips for you. So you've probably noticed that whenever you use a date field in Tableau, the date is automatically added to a hierarchy, whether or not you're using continuous or discrete dates. So you'll see that with this little plus minus here, and then again on the axis, there's that little plus minus. And so in some instances, this is a great feature. It allows you to drill down to days or to drill all the way back up to years. But what do you do if you don't want to enable this feature? There's no easy way to just simply turn this off, but there is a relatively painless workaround. So all you have to do is go to your date field, create a custom date. And here we're just going to use months. And I've actually already created this, so I'm going to hit cancel, but you would just hit OK if you were just creating this for the first time. And then if I drag this newly created field up and over, looks like nothing has changed, but that plus and minus sign is gone. So that's tip number 1. All right, and so you've worked super hard on creating an awesome line chart, and you drag it to your dashboard. And when you do, you notice that all your labels are cut off like this. So, you could rotate your labels like this, but I definitely don't recommend this because then your users have to do, turn their heads to the side to be able to read this. So we'll rotate that back. But you can just simply go to Format, go to your dates, and go to Custom. And then you can format however you want. So like three lowercase m's will just give you the abbreviation for each month. And I actually just learned this yesterday. If you do 5, it automatically just gives you the first letter of the month. So that looks nice and clean. All right. And then this last one, this is another one of those things that I wish I had known far earlier. But you can change the properties of your dates across the entire data source. So if you select your data source here and go to Date Properties, you can set your default calendar here. You can change the day that your week starts. So for instance, for me, our week starts on a Monday. So if I didn't change this at this level, I'd have to write Monday for every single calculation that used week part. So that saves, a lot of extra typing and a lot of time. You can select the month that your fiscal year starts on, and you can also select your preferred date format here as well. So a nice little tip for you that can save you a lot of time there. All right, so we are reaching the end. So we're just going to go over what we talked about today. So native date filters are definitely a great start, but often users require more flexibility. We definitely recommend using the simplest method that will still fulfill your requirements. So ask your users lots of questions ahead of development. Are there common time periods they use in reporting? Do they need to compare to previous time periods? And what level of granularity do they need to see their data? And then definitely build up a mock-up and have users test it to make sure they like how it works. And create those reference date calculations. If you use today in lots and lots of different calculations throughout your workbook, if you ever have to change that, it's going to be a huge use of your time. So if you put today in a reference calc, you can only have to change it in one spot. Let's just learn from our past mistakes. And then consider using date scaffolding to avoid missing dates. And this is super important for all dashboard development, but know your underlying data. All right, and these are, you can use those QR codes to find our Tableau public pages, and you can find, we both publish this workbook to our profile, so you can download it and take a look. So thank you all so much for your time, and we hope that you learned something new today. And I'll stop sharing.
Okay, so thank you so much, Agata and Kayla, for the speed tips as well as going deep into the date calculations. That browse period, that's actually saves up a lot of calculation, or we would have been creating those sheets with parameter actions. Okay, so coming down to, we have lots of Q&A here. So first I'll start with, there are multiple questions, but first I'll start with, what is scaffold? I've started to see that a lot lately. This question is by Alfia Robinson. Can you share your thoughts on that?
Yeah, and there's like there's a few blogs. I know there's a blog of the Flourish Twins that really goes into like deep detail about scaffolding, but it's essentially kind of adding in those dates that you're missing. So like if you have like sales data, when they're recording that data, they're only going to record data when there was a sale. So if there was a date that there was no sale or any type of activity, you won't have a row for that date. So like December 25th is Christmas, businesses are down. So in your data, you may not have a row for that date. But sometimes for analysis purposes, you want a row for that date included just for completion. And so what you do is you start with kind of a table that just has every single date in the calendar, and you left drawing your data to that. So that's kind of a simple way to explain it. And so that way, even if you're pulling your dates from that table instead of from your activity table, and so you'll have a row for each day, even if there wasn't any activity. And then you can get more detail of at what level of granularity you join that to. So like in the example that we gave, we did it for each customer. So for each customer, we wanted a row for each date for them, and that was to be able to analyze their activity at the day level. But a caveat with that is that you do increase the size of your data, so you have to kind of balance that with performance. So that's why I kind of mentioned, if you can join it at a higher level of aggregation, like if your analysis only requires you to do it at a market level or a store level, in the case of Superstore, then join it at that level of detail. So like if you wanted to do analysis at the store, you would want a row per store per date, if that makes sense.
I think so. And also you shared about the blog that can be helpful if somebody wants to deep dive. We'll take that from Kayla and share it in the chat. Now we have a similar question around this by Kirk. Is there a reason you do a join for the date scaffold versus creating a relationship to a date table, which would result in many less rows? What do you think about that?
So some of that is probably just my bias, if I'm being honest, towards joins, because I am most familiar with them. So I've never done it with a relationship. So it could potentially work in that way. I haven't thought through like all of the caveats with it. But some of that is my personal bias towards joins.
That makes sense. Uh, there are lots of questions. Let me just skim through that and see. Okay, yes. There's one question by David Cogan. He's asking, when using range of dates filter, how can you get to a date on the pop-up calendar that is many years ago? Can you jump to a year? Is it possible?
I don't think the UI is as nice as, on some websites that we've seen. I'm trying to open it up and see how it works on the relative date filter, or no, the range of dates. No, you just have to scroll through each month. It's not great.
Yeah,
And I mean, and that might be a use case for a parameter that would work better.
Okay, I'm going to take one last question from here. Can you recommend some of the best practices working with a non-Gregorian calendar? The question is by Javen, and he works in retail and uses the 454 calendar. Do you have any blogs or resources that he can refer to for some of the best practices related to non-Gregorian calendar?
I don't know about you. I can't think of any off the top of my head. I'm sure they exist. Would be happy to connect like on the side and look for those. Gata, do you know any off the top of?
I'm trying to think. I don't know if I've seen a lot of resources. I think I don't think you can use the date functions in Tableau. You're going to have to figure out different ways to calculate time periods, but
which is also another kind of cool way with scaffolding, right? Like if you bring in a table with maybe some of those functions already done, you can utilize like your data warehouse.
And in a way, it might be even simpler because it's like a more set schedule for your days and your weeks.
Right. Okay, so thank you so much, Agata and Kayla, for such a great session and repeating the Tableau conference session that so many people wouldn't have been able to attend. So that's great. Thank you so much. Thank you so much for coming and sharing your thoughts and knowledge.
Thanks for having us.
Thanks for having us.
Okay, so now we are moving on to the next expert we have today. So I need to share my screen. That was okay.
And I think it will be Scott because Sherzodbek has some issue.
Yep. Okay, so today we have Scott Eaton. You can actually find him on LinkedIn. You can just search his name and you'll be able to find him, or we can also drop the LinkedIn URL. He's a data visualization manager at JP Morgan and is a seasoned data visualization professional with 19 years of experience. And he has so much experience with creating dashboards, writing dashboard documentation, and implementing data visualization best practices. He has been using Tableau over the past 13 years and is really passionate about mentoring. About his Tableau journey, he's a member of a leadership team for the DataFam Career Pathmakers Tableau user group. That's a great Tableau user group, and they are trying to help people get on to their journey who are transitioning or those who are starting. So do follow that user group as well, and has been mentoring in the external Tableau community for 7 years. He's also a member of the Tableau Leaders Group at Chase and won the 2023 Chase Tableau Community Mentor Award. That's awesome. I've seen those awards on LinkedIn, and the things you have been going over there at JP Morgan. It's kind of insane, and like it's really nice. And fun fact about Scott is he's a huge Star Trek fan and has created his own data source listing every episode and movie across every series in chronological order by star date. So he could watch everything in the proper order. How many times you have watched that already, Scott? You need to share that. Okay, and I think that's a great data source. It covers 11 series over 900 plus episodes. Kind of interesting for anyone who wants to whiz about Star Trek. You got the man. Just message him, and you can get that data set. And today he's going to, from all his expertise, he's going to share with us also one of the great sessions from Tableau conference: dashboard documentation, the why, how, and what. Over to you, Scott.
All right, thank you. Appreciate you guys having me and giving me the opportunity to kind of share the session for those who weren't able to attend the conference. So let me go ahead and share my screen here. 1 second. All right. You guys see my screen okay?
Yes, we do.
All right. All right. Again, appreciate everybody letting me come and speak today. This is a subject very passionate to my heart. It's I know it's not a, for lack of a better term, a sexy part of anybody's job, but it is what I call a necessary evil. So I hope that by the end of this session, you guys will know the importance of documenting dashboard, and then along with that, know the reasons behind why it's important, how to do it, and what you need to include in it. So with that, we'll kind of dive right in. So a little introduction about myself. Some of the stuff was already mentioned. So in addition to that, from a professional standpoint, I just want to also mention I am a top data visualization voice on LinkedIn. I started really getting involved in the kind of social media aspect of things last September when the DataFam Career Pathmakers user group started. So you'll find I'm a frequent poster out there, as well as contributor to some of the data visualization collaborative articles out there. So definitely take a look at my post and some of those articles for some good insights. Some additional fun facts about myself. I've been married for 25 years, just hit that anniversary in July. Or I'm sorry, this past month, a couple weeks ago. So very definitely heavy about that I've been married to the same person and we've gotten along for the last 25 years. So I'm a diehard Cleveland Browns fan, American football, have been for almost 40 years now, ever since I was 8 years old. So very passionate. That's the one sport I follow year round, even in the off season to figure out what's going on. And here in the U.S., in my mind, it's officially football season right now with training camp starting this week. So looking forward to that. And as was stated, my favorite kind of TV franchise is Star Trek, with my favorite series in that franchise being Deep Space Nine. And that has a tie-in to what I do currently. The reason one of the reasons I love what I do is the storytelling aspect of building dashboards. And Star Trek was always good about kind of telling some very good and involved stories. My favorite franchise is Deep Space Nine, which was, I think, the third series to come out in the late 90s, early 2000s. And when it got to the last kind of 2 or 3 seasons, this was the first time Star Trek kind of did an overarching story across all 3 seasons. And it mixed in a lot of little stories in between, but the overarching stories kept me engaged, enthralled, and just on the edge of my seat, which really started fostering my love of storytelling. And I've carried that through to my work today. So. All right, what are we going to talk about today? First thing we're going to talk about is why should you document your dashboard. Then we'll go into how do you document your dashboard from a tool perspective. And then third, what are the different sections you should have in your dashboard document. And then finally, I will do a quick like screenshot demo of a tool called RapidDocs, which is an automated tool for dashboard documentation. I by no means am using this as a marketing tool for marketing session for the tool. I just want to show it to you as a tool that kind of made my life easier from what was a 100% manual process before. So first, why do you document your dashboard? As I stated previously, dashboard documentation is the worst part of our jobs, and just documentation in general is the worst part of any job. But a lot of times it is a necessary evil that's going to save not only you time later, but someone else's time if you have to hand over your dashboard to somebody. And through the course of my career, I found there's two main purposes that you do dashboard documentation. So number one, and a really big piece of where I work in a financial institution, is audit purposes. There's not only in banks, but other companies who, as part of projects they do or their normal line of business functioning, they go through periodic audits. And I found it's good to kind of get this documentation done up front, rather than have to wait for a failed audit because they require the documentation to complete it. So if you can get it done up front, then you won't have to kind of go through that action plan process later. Second, decrease time in reverse engineering, which is a big thing for me. Like I said, I've been doing this for almost 20 years, and there's been many times in my career that I've done this, that I've either taken something over from somebody, either temporarily or permanently, and due to the complexity of the dashboard, it has taken me like a week or more just to figure out the base functionality of the dashboard, because you're trying to figure out how the dashboard is built, what the calculations are. Some calculations are 2-3 levels embedded deep in other calculations. So having the proper documentation in place can save you a lot of time later if you're building a dashboard and let's say it's being used and you maybe do yearly enhancements and you forget a few things. You can go back to the documentation, look at it, get a quick refresher, and you're well on your way. Or if you're handing it over to somebody, they don't have to go through a lot of the painstaking process you may have gone to previously to figure out the workings of the dashboard. Okay, how do you document your dashboard? The way I've done my documentation has been in a Microsoft Word format, but however, whatever format you decide to put it in, whether it's Excel, PDF, just make sure it's the right format for you. And you want to make sure that you have some core considerations you're thinking about when you're doing this. So first, make sure it's at the appropriate level of detail. So you need to be thinking about the developer level. So are you creating this for junior developers, senior developers, and so on, as well as the dashboard complexity. So how detailed do you want the documentation to be? So keep those things in mind as you're starting to think about creating it. Next, make sure it has a table of contents. The tool I'm going to show you, I used for a business dashboard previously, and it generated 260 pages of technical documentation, which, just because of the size of the dashboard, it needed to get and pulling all that information. And in a situation like that, you want to make sure you have a detailed table of contents, so that way your users aren't having to scroll through and to get to the specific sections they want to look at. So if you've got a quick table of contents, let's say they only want to look at calculated fields, okay, bam, they can click on it. It'll navigate down to the bookmark on that page. So definitely make sure you've got a good table of contents in there. Next, you want to make sure you're using the standard font type and size, just like you would with the dashboard, to make it easily accessible and readable for your audience that's going to be looking at it. And then finally, make sure it's in an accessible location that can be looked at. So whether it's a shared drive out on the web somewhere, Confluence page, something like that, just so that way your intended audience will have easy access to it. All right, what should be in your documentation template? So I'm going to talk through what I think are like the 10 key sections that should be in your documentation template. They've worked well in the various templates I've had across the teams I've been in. Now you can add more or you can take away as to what makes sense for how you're creating it. But again, this is just in my opinion, the kind of the core things I have in mind. So first we have your summary details. So this is going to be all your high-level business information around the dashboard itself, and I'll talk some more detail about that when that section comes up. Next is going to be the access information. So this is all your security related information about how you're accessing the dashboard, how users request access, how they get into it, and kind of all your mappings of workflows and groups to dashboards, things like that. Next, you're going to have your purpose of the dashboard. So this is basically your business case that you'll either know and can put it in there, or you'll get from the business. So you want to make sure that that's in there as well. Next up is your data sources. So this is going to be all relevant information related to the data sources in your dashboard. And again, I'll talk about what goes in that section here in a little bit. Next up is your available filters and your predefined filters. So kind of spelling out what are the filters you're making available to your users, and what filters do you still have going on behind the scenes that they're not able to use, but that you just want to call out. Next, your dashboard illustrations. So these are just the screenshots of your dashboard, which really will be beneficial, especially if you're handing over something and they do not currently have access to your environment to be able to see those dashboards where they're at. So you want them to be able to just pull up the documentation, look at the screenshots to get a good feeling of the dashboard. Parameters, so you definitely want to kind of call out the parameters that you're using in your dashboard. Then your calculated fields and your tables that are being used. And the calculated fields for me is probably the biggest section in there, because there are some dashboards, and I've created some dashboards where there's been 150 to 200 calculated fields. Just depending, like I said, it's complexity. I work in a bank, and I've created recruiting dashboards and survey analysis dashboards, things like that. So you want to make sure you have those thoroughly documented to be able to get what you want. To either get what you want, or if you have to hand it off to where that person can get what they want fairly easy. So first thing, I want to dive into the summary details. So again, this is all the high level business information you want to have in there. So you want to have things in there like the dashboard name. So what are you calling the dashboard? Who's the dashboard owner and the developer from the technology side? In case there's technical issues that arise with it, you want to have your whoever's looking at this to have a point of contact that can reach you out on the tech side. And on the same matter, you want to put in there who the business owner is of the dashboard. Now, sometimes the tech owner and the business owner are the same, but most times they're different. So you definitely want to call that out what line of business that the business owner is in. The refresh frequency of the dashboard. So you want to have the time frame of the refresh. So is it a monthly refresh? Is it a daily refresh? Is it a weekly refresh? And the reason I call it out here, and you'll also see that this is called out in the data source section, is those data refreshes can be different depending on, maybe you have daily data, but the refresh only occurs weekly. So you definitely want to make sure you call out those differences. Also have in there what I call a change ID, or some type of ID where you have some kind of evergreen system that's tracking the revisions to the dashboard. That could be ServiceNow, it could be Jira, just some mechanism to where if an audit takes place, they can come in, be able in the system of choice, look up that ID and be able to see kind of the path of the revisions and the development cycle of that dashboard. The production go live date is a good idea to have in there, just from the aspect of knowing how long the dashboard's in a production state, to kind of help with doing usage research and things like that. And then finally, the dashboard URL, so just a link to the dashboard, as well as the documentation URL, which will most likely be the location that you would store this documentation along with any other things you may have related to the dashboard itself. You want to just have that link in there as well. All right, next, your access section. So this is going to have all of your security related information for your dashboard. And I've kind of taken two approaches to this over the course of my career. One way being, here at Chase, we do access to our dashboards with Active Directory groups. So I have in the past gone through the path of saying, okay, here's the Active Directory groups that have access to the dashboard, and I've put them in a table in the document itself. That's good if you maybe have one or two dashboards that you're only responsible for. But if you have a whole suite of dashboards, as I've progressed in my career, I've had to handle more and more dashboards. I thought it was a good idea to basically create a reference spreadsheet that has a lot of this information in it. So we use Alteryx as well to kind of create workflows to generate Tableau data source files. So in this document that I created, I have tabs to where, okay, here's our Active Directory groups linked to our Alteryx servers. Here's the AD groups on our UAT server. Here's the groups on our production server. Here's the approver groups that are related to those Active Directory groups. And then I have a mapping of dashboard to the groups that are tied to it. And then I just basically have a standard paragraph I create with a link to that document in the section. And that's the paragraph. And it's a very small paragraph, and that's the entire access section. But anytime there's an update, there's a new dashboard, an update to groups, I just go and update that spreadsheet. And then it's always in line with all the documentations that are created for the dashboards. So kind of a good practice I've gotten into from that standpoint. Next is the purpose of the dashboard. Like I mentioned before, this is just your business case of the dashboard, and this can be as little as one sentence to as much as a paragraph. I would keep it to about a paragraph, just so you're not taking up too much space. But if you know it, you can create it, but a lot of times I reach out to the business owner of the dashboard and have them send me that information, and then I just put it in the documentation. All right, next, your data source sections. This is one of the keys, what I would call a primary section of the documentation, because this is where you're definitely going to get a lot of your data related information. So what you want to have in here is, one, your data source name, the description. So what is the data contained in the data source? Having that listed here. What is the date range? So is it 1 year of data, 2 years of data, 6 months? So it's important to know the amount of data you have in here. That could help as you're diagnosing potential problems that may occur later. The refresh frequency, like I stated earlier, maybe your dashboard refreshes weekly, but the data that's coming into the data that you're using is daily. So definitely calling out in the data source section that this is daily refreshes, as opposed to in the summary detail section, we're going to call it the dashboard refresh, let's say is weekly. The database, so kind of listing, is it coming out of a Oracle database, Teradata, SQL Server, something like that, or is it a file database per se? So is it an Excel file? Is it some other file? So calling out what is the source system of your data. The query, so if you're using any custom queries, having some mechanism to embed those queries in here. And the old way I used to do it was any custom queries that I had that I was using in Tableau, I would just copy that query, paste it into a notepad document, and embed it in the documentation. So just an easy way to where somebody can look up what the queries are being used in your data source. Along with the table joins that are being used. Again, when I was doing this 100% manually, I had a table in there that listed, okay, here's the tables, here's the two tables, here's the join, and what was the actual join itself, just to provide some further context around that. Now, as I've kind of evolved this with the use of Alteryx that we do frequently here in the firm, a lot of this information is contained in the Alteryx workflow, and you can probably do this with a Tableau prep flow as well. I've implemented certain kind of documentation standards that I do in the workflow, like annotations, going into like this, if people are familiar with Alteryx, the select tool in Alteryx, and putting descriptions in for the columns and things like that, to where you could go into here, get those annotations, look up the metadata, go into some of the input tools, look up the queries where you can get all the join information and so on. And all that is contained in there. So in lieu of duplicating all that information, I just embed the Alteryx workflow in the documentation itself, to where they can just go in, click on it, and bring it up in Alteryx and be able to get all that information. So that's kind of a little more efficient way I've come up to do that. And another thing that I embed in there is just another spreadsheet that I keep updated, which has what I call the workflow schedule information. So this has all the workflows listed in it. What are the refresh schedules of the workflows, and what dashboards are they tied to? Just so they're kind of correlated together, and have that appropriate data source section. Now, what I will say is, if you're using multiple data sources in your dashboards, it's probably better to have, it's probably best to have a section for each data source with all the same information, just so that way it's easily searchable in a table of contents and easy to get to. Next, we've got your available filters and your predefined filters. So with your available filters, this is all the filters you're making available to the users to slice and dice your data in the dashboard. So I basically, in my documentation, I've listed them out in bullet point form, and then I have them I've kind of split into sections. Okay, these are global filters. These are specific dashboard page filters, or these are maybe worksheet only filters, and calling those out. And a lot of times I have my filters named to where it's pretty self-explanatory what that filter is, but if it's not, then it would be a good idea to put a little description next to the filter on what that does, just for clarification purposes. And then you do the same thing for the predefined filters, except this is on the flip side. These are the filters you're calling out that you're using on the dashboard, but that are not available to the user to filtering. So it may be some predefined filters on the data source size, like you only want to show specific regions or line of business, or only US data as opposed to international data, things like that. You definitely want to call some of that out. Next, we got your dashboard illustrations. And again, these are the screenshots of the dashboard. The tool that I'm going to demo later will actually load in the thumbnails that the Tableau workbook saves. You can also upload your own custom images, and that's what I did before when I did my manual documentation. I would just take print screens of the dashboard pages, save them off as PNGs, and pull them into my documentation template. But definitely a good section to have for those who are reading the documentation that don't have access to your environment yet. And next, you want to kind of have a parameter section in there, calling out some specific things around the parameters. So you want to have, okay, what's the name of your parameter? What's the data type, string, date, etc. What's the default value? So what is the value you're having it start with when the dashboard opens? Calling that out, and then also calling out, okay, you have your default value, but what's the list of all the possible values? Just so whoever's in there can get a quick glance of the various parameters you're using, what to do, sheet swapping, view swapping, or anything that you're providing dynamic access for the user to do. Next, we have calculated fields, and to me, this is probably the most important section of the documentation. A lot of people ask questions around, well, how do you calculate this? How do you calculate that? And especially when it comes to users who use your dashboard but are maybe not familiar with the process you went into creating it. and you want to be able to provide them in business terms what that calculation is. In order to do that, you need to have an easy way to kind of look up the calculated fields instead of potentially taking extra time, like I mentioned before, to dive into a workbook. Okay, well, here's this calculation, but you see it's using like 2 other calculations, so now you got to go look up those and then go look up those again. Or you can easily maybe do a search and find, or just scroll down to the calculated field section and do a quick scan of those calculated fields and get that information. So in that section, you're going to have, okay, what's the field name? So what's the name you gave to the calculation? Is it a measure? Is it a dimension? What's the data type of it? And then for me, the big thing is the formula and the code. And for me, this was huge, and where I kind of started thinking about the process of figuring out a better way to go from manual documentation to automated was my old process for this was, especially the first kind of really big documentation I did, was a dashboard that had 150 calculations. This section alone took me a week or so to do, because I had to go and it was just a constant go into Tableau, bring up the edit box for the calculated field, copy the formula, paste it into Word, and a very repetitive process. It was beneficial when it was done, but it was a very repetitive process and time consuming. So that was the impotence to have me start going down the route of, there's got to be a tool out there that can automate that. And after probably about a year or so of searching, I was able to find one, and that's the demo I'm going to show you later here. And then finally, okay, what's the data source that calculation is linked to? So to me, this is, again, is the most important section, and will most likely be your kind of biggest section of the document, just from a sheer amount of data perspective. Then finally, we have the tables and fields section. So very similar to calculated fields, except this is going to be the listing of all your physical tables and fields that you're either pulling in from a database or you're pulling in from a file data source. So this is, you're going to have some very similar fields. You're going to have your field name. Is it a dimension or a measure? What the data type is, what the actual physical table name is. So this is good from the perspective of, if you're having issues with your dashboard and it's related to actual database tables or columns, having this information will help you kind of narrow down what the problem is and be able to go look at those specific tables and tables and columns directly. And then again, what is the data source that is linked to? Okay, now that we've kind of talk through everything that should be in your documentation, I'd like to go through and show you guys kind of just a quick demo of a tool I found probably 2 years ago. And like I said, the impotence of it was just how much potential time, well, the amount of time it took for me to create documentation for the complex dashboard I did, and knowing I've used this template on various teams and I've shared it with other people. I wanted to see if there was a way to kind of automate this process and just make it a lot quicker. And I can say that I found that with this tool, and it took what was a 100% manual process and automated 85% of it. And it not only does dashboard documentation, but you can also document Tableau data sources, Tableau prep files, and on a side note, it also does Power BI documentation. So it is starting to grow a little bit. But I'm mainly going to focus just on the dashboard piece here. So first, what is RapidDocs? It's a tool that generates thorough and automated documentation around Tableau dashboards, data sources, workflows by reading the XML of the workbook file or the data source file or the prep flow that you upload to it. There's no coding or scripting involved to do it. Like I said, it just reads all that and spits it out, and everything is done locally on your computer. What are the features? It's fully customizable. You can control the sections you have in the documentation. You can control the order of them. You can control what you include in those sections. So headers, footers, things like that, highly customizable. You can upload your own screenshots for the documentation or use the thumbnails in the tool itself that it reads in from the workbook. And then finally, you can output the format in, it has 5 different outputs you can format it in. So Excel, Word, CSV, PDF, and HTML. So I personally use Word because it gives, it's fully customizable, because even though, like I said, it automated 85% of it, there still are sections I need to do some manual additions. I need to add some manual sections in there, and I'll talk through those, because at the end of the demo here, I'll show you guys an example of the documentation the tool generates, and I'll kind of go through that and what sections I kind of had to modify, and putting it in a Word format for me is the best format to do that in. There is a cost to the tool. So if you do decide that you want to get the tool, definitely go out to their website. If you just Google Rapid Docs, it'll take you to their website, and there's a Rapid Docs for Tableau. You can read all their information out there, and then you can get a license. You can get licensing based on monthly, yearly, or lifetime. So, all right, so we'll go ahead and dive into the demo here, just so you can see a quick kind of the process of how it generates the documentation here. So when you'll first come in, it'll ask you to log into the tool, and once you log in, then you'll see your first screen will be the image on the left that you see here, where it will ask you to upload a .twb or twbx file to read. So you upload the tool, it goes through its process of reading in all the metadata, and then you'll see the screenshot on the left where it asks you to start working on your customizations for the tool. So first customization that will come up is the screen on the left here, where it'll ask you to put in just some basic information around, around who the users are, what the dashboard name is, when it went live, description of the dashboard, and so on. You don't have to put this information in there. You can leave that blank, but that is a section that it adds in there. Then once you do that, it'll take you to the screen on the right where you can start customizing what sections you want to include in the documentation. So this is just a brief snapshot of there, to where you see the sections you can include, and you can also change the order of how you want them to appear in your document. Next, it will then bring up a screen to where you can either tell it to use the thumbnails that are in the workbook, or you can upload your own custom images for the screenshots. So make your decision there, and then it'll take you to the actual screen to where you can, in the sections you chose to add, what specific things do you want to include in those sections. And just like you could with the overall sections, you can also change the order of how you want them to appear in there. When I create mine, I don't include a lot of these sections, so I don't include sections on like, okay, here's all the unused objects. I don't include sections around like having mark types included, what's on the column shelf, what's on the row shelf, things like that. I try to keep things at a higher level. But you can definitely include those if you want to. And I know, and it puts things in kind of tabular formats, and I'll show you, like I said, the format once we get through here in a minute or so. Then finally, once you've got all your customizations in place, it'll take you to this final output screen, to where you can choose the output you want. It'll have you save it off, and then it will bring it up for you. So let me go show you guys the actual document here. And let me enlarge this a little bit to make it a little easier to see here. All right, so this is the documentation that it generates. And if you recall when I first mentioned in the beginning of the presentation about having a table of contents, this is what I was referring to. This has a very thorough table of contents. So the numbered ones are the main sections, and then there's also a table of contents for each subsection in there. This was something when I was doing it manually, I had to create myself. So I would go in, put that in myself, add bookmarks into the Word document, and so on. Now there's a little bit of that I had to do to link some things back up, but for the most part, this entire table of contents was generated by the tool based on the workbook and what I told it to include. So here's the purpose of report section. Like I mentioned, this is a manual section I have to add in. This is not something that the tool generates. So very easy, like I said, to get in. And I keep in line with the formatting that the tool uses. But again, this is a manual section I add in. The summary details section, this is another manual section I added in that's not generated. But with examples of some of the information I was talking about earlier. So it's got all the relevant information, report name, business owner, tech owner, and so on. Summary stats, this was generated by the tool. So this just gives you overall stats of, okay, what's the number of dashboards in your workbook? What's the number of worksheets? Number of data sources, filters, fields, custom SQL. So pretty much summarize calculated fields, things like that. So it'll just give you a high level summary of everything in there. This is the access section I was talking about. Very simple and something I can pick up and drop into other documentations that I do. Since this is a fully manual section and this section never changes, I just copy and paste it. The available filters and the predefined filters, you can include like there's an option where you can include like quick filters in some of the sections, but I did not like the way it kind of calls them out, and it doesn't really kind of tell you if they're global, if they're dashboard specific, or so on. So that's why I kind of created my own filter section. And you see I have them calling out, and these ones were specific to different dashboard pages I have. So I have them sectioned out by the dashboard page, what those filters are. And in the case for the one filter here, this is where I have the description of what it is, because it's not self-explanatory by the name what it is. You don't see a predefined filter section here because I do not have any predefined filters on this specific dashboard. For the data source section here, the manual part is this top part where I talked about embedding the Alteryx workflow and the workflow info schedule. So that's what's embedded here. Everything else here is generated by the tool. So you got your different data source names, what's the data source type, and some of the other information here. Here's your tables and fields section. So this auto-generated by the tool. So this gives you your data source name, the source database. So in this case, a lot of these were in Excel. So what the table name is, what the field name is, remote field name. So this field name is what you're calling it. The remote field name would be like if you were using a specific database like Oracle, the remote field name would be what the actual column name is, as opposed to what you changed the name to in Tableau. Data type and some of these other columns. Some of these other columns I've found aren't really relevant to what I would want my documentation, but I know, and I've been an active user of the tool for a while, and I provide frequent kind of feedback and enhancement requests, and they've been able to implement a lot of those. So there is a future enhancement coming to where not only can you pick and choose the sections and subsections, you can pick and choose what columns in the tables you want to include as well. So that's the tables and fields section. Here's the calculated field section I was talking about. So you've got your field name, the Tableau field name here, and this was the impotence for me kind of submitting that enhancement request. A lot of times when we're needing to replicate fields, we're just kind of duplicating the fields and then giving it our own names. Well, you'll see that Tableau gives it its own default name behind the scenes, like calculation underscore bunch of numbers, or it'll have that same calculation then put underscore copy or something like that. Again, this is another column that's not relevant. So I would have liked the ability to be able to exclude that out of my table, and in a future release that will be there. To me, the key column in this table is the formula column. So you can see based on it pulling in all the XML data that it pulled in all the formulas for all the calculated fields I have in there. and has it notated so you can easily go through. And maybe there's a field in here that you want to reuse in another dashboard. This is a good way to come into the documentation. If you know what dashboard it's in, you can come into it, look for it, copy that calculation, paste it into your Tableau workbook. Let's see, and then here's the parameter section. List out some stuff. I have a sets section in here as well, so yeah, it can document sets. Then we have where you can document your actual dashboard pages and your worksheets. So for the dashboard page itself, it starts out with the screenshot of the dashboard page, does some summary stats of the number of data sources, parameters, quick filters, and things on that page. And then it lists out, okay, here's all the worksheets being used in that page. So you can get a, if you want just to get some information on how many worksheets are in a page or how many dashboards are being used for a specific worksheet, you can go to this information, parameters being used. And I have this calling out the quick filters in there, but that's why I added kind of the supplementary information earlier with the available filters and predefined filters, because this section to me is not always informative. And then this, you can also include, okay, what actions do you have tied to the dashboards? So it will, and then it will list out the actions and give you all the action specific information that you would need. And then finally, the worksheet section, pretty similar, but it just gives you a little bit of the reverse. So this will give you the worksheet name. It'll list out what the dashboards were that the worksheet was used in. Here's all the quick filters being used on the worksheet and the calculated fields being used in that worksheet as well. You can also list here, I didn't include it in here, but you can all list, okay, what's the mark types being used, what's on the column shelf, what's on the row shelf, and so on. All right, so let me go back here really quick. All right, just to kind of wrap up, what we talked about today was why is documentation important? So mainly two reasons: from audit purposes and to avoid excessive time in reverse engineering. So how should you do it? Definitely make sure you have a well-defined table of contents. Make sure you're using a standard font type and size, and know your audience. And then what should be in there? Again, I've got the 10 key things listed there. You can add to or take away as what makes sense for you and your organization. So appreciate everybody's time. Thank you for having me today.
Thank you very much, Scott. We have a lot of questions. We don't have so much time, but
Thank you
I
so
will
much,
let
Scott, for giving us through the walkthrough of the tool as well as the process, because documentation is really important, not just for us, but for whosoever is going to inherit our work. If somebody is there who does it in the right way, it's a bliss. If it's not there, that's a disaster for sure. And thank you so much for taking through the whole process, because it's really important, and keeping that all the best practices that you also shared with us. I think it's going to be really helpful. I'm going to the Q&A. Okay. So we have a couple of questions. How do you keep the documentation up to date when changes are made to your dashboard?
That it's kind of mixed. With the tool, you still have to regenerate the dashboard. So I recommend versioning your different documentations, especially when it comes to the manual pieces. Now, for some of the manual sections, like I said, like the access session, summary details, some of those that won't change, you could use the tool to regenerate the documentation and then just pick up and lift those sections into the documentation. But anything that changes in your Tableau workbooks, like calculated fields or data sources, you'll need to rerun the workbook through the tool, and it will pick up those changes. So it's, or if another option, if it's something very simple, like maybe you only change one calculated field or something, maybe it's not worth the effort to go through and redo redo all those pickups and uplift. Maybe you just go into your current version, add that row into that specific section, and then just call like a 1.1 or something like that. So you have to figure out based on whether it's minor changes or major changes as far as what approach to take. But for anything major, I would say, yeah, run it through the tool if you're going to use the tool. Or if you're doing it from like a manual template, then yeah, like I say, just go through, add the changes into your manual version, and then just make sure you version it off.
Thank you so much. It totally makes sense how we can version it. There's an interesting question. How do you document things like using hacks like blank or average in order to do certain things in Tableau?
Those would be caught and I do that. I create like blank fields. When I don't know if people are familiar with trying to hide like the blue highlighting on worksheets when you're using them for like band numbers, or if you want to use like actions on them and you don't want the blue highlight to show. I use the old method of creating true false fields and then creating actions to kind of keep that filter actions. Those will, again, you can, whether it's manual or through the automated tool, you can definitely have that documented. Like through the automated tool, which is what I've been using the most, it will pick up those calculations in the calculated field sections. But if there's any like caveats or something you might want to call out, that might be, maybe you want to add an additional section. I'm not sure what you would call it, but that probably is something you would want to manually add in there to say, hey, or saying this is used for such and such, or it could be, and if your manual template, this is fine, but when you're doing it, if you're making modifications to the automated version, normally I would add like a comments field or a comments column and just jot that in the comments. That works well when you're doing it manually. But if you're using the tool to generate it, that's not a column it generates, so you will lose that column. Depending on how you're doing it, if it's manually, add a comment column into whatever table you're having all that information in. If it's through the tool itself, I would just have a section that kind of calls out some special considerations.
Okay, I think that makes sense, and we'll keep a note of that. Thank you so much, Scott, again for bringing this insightful session to us. Also, like repeating what you had shared with Tableau Conference. And okay,
Yeah,
so now.
Yep, no problem. Like I said, I am on LinkedIn, so if anybody has any more questions, feel free to reach out. I'm happy to connect and talk about documentation, Tableau, Star Trek, anything you want to talk about. Just reach out and give me a shout.
Sure. Okay, so now we are on the last phase of our event today, and we have Sherzodbek Ibrahimov. Thank you so much for coming, Sherzod. Great to have you again on the other tug. We recently had him on our other tug as well. So, okay, I'll just start with his introduction. You can follow him on Twitter at IB and about his journey. He's a senior data analyst at Park University. He began his journey with Tableau in July 2016 and has more than 10 years of experience in analytics across various industries. He initially joined the Tableau community to find answers to his questions on the forums, and also now he became an active participant in community challenges, participating in Make Home Monday, B2B, Back to His Basics, and more. Like, he has been a very active participant. And fun fact about him is he is a certified accountant, which is similar to USS CPA credential. That's a lot of studying. And he holds bachelor's and master's accountant degrees, but never ended up pursuing this path. And his presentation today is going to be understanding, identifying, and handling outliers in Tableau. So I won't take much time. I'll hand it over to Sherzod now.
So today I'll be talking about the outliers and how to identify them using Tableau's built-in feature, and also using the calculated fields. And also I will be talking about the ways to handle the outliers strategies. This is sort of information about me, and like person introduced me. I started my journey with Tableau in 2016. And since then, I've been involved in different community projects. And lately, I've been involved with the community projects such as Macarman, the Back to Visual Basics, and other ones. And humbly, I was featured by Tableau in several times. And I also offer mentorships, visa review, and a top mate. If you want to check it out, it's free of charge. And you can always connect me or follow me on LinkedIn and the Tableau public. And this is some of the examples of the visualization I built for the last few months. In case you've seen it, that's me. All right, small disclaimer. This is not a comprehensive presentation, and there are more methods available, but I will be only cover some of them. And this is intended for general audience, so it's not specific for the data scientist, data analyst, or statistician, and just for general purposes. And I'm always open for improvements and feedback. All right, today that's gonna be the very short. My agenda will be very short, so keep it short and sweet. All right, what will be definition of the outliers? It's an outlier, it's a data point, event, or item that is significantly different from other observation in the data sets. And examples will be here in the picture. You can see that every fish here, it's swimming to the left, but unfortunately, the red one is swimming to the right direction. So totally there's something going on here. Or say you planted the tulips, they're supposed to be the red and you end up getting one yellow one. Or say you are producing the balls, they're supposed to be blue and same size, but you end up getting one with a red and a bigger size. So these are the examples of the outliers, and the reason they could happen is because of the variability in the data set, could be error, or it could be just a rare event, just one-off event. All right, what kind of role they play? The first, whenever there is an outlier, they can indicate there's errors in data. And they could be highlight the data variability and the distribution. It can also detect us the rare events. It can potentially influence our statistical analysis. And because of that, it can also tell us the ways to improve our predictive models. And of course, because of the outliers, it could also help us to uncover the important patterns and issues. All right, let's take a small study case so we can better understand it. Let's say we're in the business of selling main suites, and there was requested to find the average customer height, and we end up getting the result that on average, the main suites, the average size of the main customers were 218 centimeters, a little over 2 meters, or about 7 feet and 2 inches. Meanwhile, the average US men's average height was 175 centimeters, so about 5 feet and 9 inches. And here, we can ponder what's going on. It's a big difference. And to get into the cause of this, the big difference, we can look at the underlying data. And as we can see from a picture, that we are able, there was one person which is way off from others. That's probably what is causing us the result average to be higher. And if we look at the centimeter, at the height in centimeters, we are getting something between 168 centimeters to 172 majority, but one person is 510, which probably doesn't exist, that person. It's just to get to the point to show the what could happen. And that's why we're getting when we're averaging, we are getting 218 centimeters, which is totally off from the US average. And what we should be doing instead, we should be exclude something like that because it's a one-off. There's the rare event that we don't get this kind of the person. And we should be using the normal sizes, the heights. And the average will get about 169 centimeters, so about 5 feet and 7 inches, which is very close to the US average. All right, this is a kind of comic I was able to find how much the outliers can change the direction of the game. All right, so what could mean when we don't take care of the outliers? It can distort our mean, variances, and statistical measures, just like I mentioned. Because of the one person, our mean went off. And it could also bring to the it could bring to the misleading trends. It could also bring to the biased predictive models. It reduced the validity of the statistical tests and confidences intervals. And also it could influence misleading information, or like the distorted means could lead to the incorrect conclusions. Okay, there are mainly three types of the outliers. There's the first one is global. So the data point which lies abnormal distance from others values in data sets. And as you can see in the picture, all pink one, they are very close to each other and they kind of forming the one trend, upward trend. But there's a purple on the left top corner is a purple. It's way off from others, and that's why it could be the global outlier. All right, and there's something called a contextual outlier, which is observation that is significantly different from others. That's it based on the specific context of the analysis. And I'll show the example here. So imagine in the y-axis, I'm gonna keep it empty for now, some kind of measure. And on the x-axis, we have and from January through the May, we have the numbers going up, and the June we're dropping, and again the July going up, and eventually is going down. So now I know there's something wrong here. It's in the June because it went down, and we know it's an outlier. But can you guys guess what could be the y-axis? Any guesses? Well, probably it's gonna best guess will be the temperature, because during the May, June, July, August, we see like the peak in the temperature, and unfortunately seeing this June temperature going down below the being very low. It's abnormal. There's probably something happened, and that's in the context of the temperature in the month. Yeah, this can be outlier. And another one will be the last one, the collective one. It's very similar to the global one, but instead like a single one, it's going to be collection of values that are different from the entire data set. That might be not the best visualization, but just to get the point across. So we have the pinks spread out, and the purple one kind of off from others. All right, there are several methods, but I will cover only a few of them. One of the standard deviation. So eventually the standard deviation identifies the data points that are deviates significantly from the mean. And usually we use a specific number standard deviation from the mean. And the practice usually you use either 2 or 3 times of standard deviations, plus or minus. And a formula will be something like this. And this is the formula. It's sigma. It's for standard deviation, and that's how it's set up. And the good news, you don't have to do it manually. The Tableau has a built-in formulas for it. And this is how the visually looks like. So usually, our data, anything within the three standard deviations, we have about 99.7% of the data. They are within the 3 data standard deviation. Anything above, just like a less than 1.1%. All right, and now I will be going into a more practical aspect, and I will be using Tableau that I built it. So the first, like I said, we can use the Tableau's built-in distribution band feature, and to get there, Tableau has an analytics pane, as you know. All you have to do, go to distribution band, drag and drop, go to the table. Now it'll give us option. Make sure you go to computation. Make sure you click on here, and we have several options. And the one we'll be using right now, it was standard deviations. And again, it defaults to 1 to 1 minus 1 minus 1 to 1, but we're gonna change to 2 for this example. And make sure you select the population. That's what we are using right now. All right, and just go here for just for now. There we go. And we just built the Tableau's built-in standard deviation band, distribution band. So what's really happening? Anything this line above will be the outliers, and we can visually can see there's three the events or like a data points that are outliers because they are about 2 standard deviation from the mean. And at some time we can see here this number, it's 2 standard deviation below the mean. So those other will be the points that are outliers, and that's how we are visually can see it. But what if we want to use a calculation, we want to exclude them, right? For some reason. And unfortunately, you can do either manually or you can use the calculated fields, and we get there. And that's all we'll be using it. And right now for already built in. So again, we have to find out what will be the upper and what will be lower standard deviation, and anything above will be the outlier, anything below will be outlier of these lines. And for example, to get the upper, so the first one, if you remember, we have to find the average. The average will be here. And now we have to multiply by the 2 times of, and that's why I set up my multiplier. It's a 2 times of the standard deviation. But again, Tableau has a built-in standard deviation formula. So all you have to do is just bring the measure that we'll be using it. And for lower, it will be exactly the same, except it's going to be minus. So we are deducting the 2 times standard deviation from the average. So now, once we can bring this here to here, and it will use as a reference, and that's why you get those 2 lines here. And the last one will be we will use the outlier filter. They will use as a filter, or we use as the color. So what's really happening? We are saying anything about if the sum of profits are greater than the upper band, or if the sum of profits is lower than the lower band, it will be outliers. Anything between these 2 lines will be normal. And we're gonna color it. I'm using on the second one, and once we color, we get in this nice one, so we can visually see that anything about these lines are the red ones, which are outliers, and the one in the below is outlier. Anything within there are normal ones. And now, like I said, we use it as a filter. Now, if for any reason we end up need to exclude them, we just click here, normal one. Now we have the values within they are excluded, the outliers excluded the normal values. All right, and that's what the first standard deviation. We'll go back to the presentation. All right, so now there's another one method called the interquartile range. It's something we probably have seen it. You heard about is a box plot, or box and a whisker plot, or IQR for short. So eventually, I will go over the definition very quickly, but as we get the examples, it's going to be much more clear. So now it is detects the outliers based on spread of middle 50% of data. There are outliers. So the outliers are considered when they are below the lower fence, below the lower fence, or above the fence. And that's how the formula is. And to get the IQR, so the IQR, it's from quartile 3 and quartile 1, we have to remove them. And that's the way it looks like. So this is a quartile 1, this is a median, and this is a quartile 3. So anything between difference will be the interquartile range. So once we apply the lower or upper fence, the formula, anything below the range will be outliers, anything above the upper fence will be outliers too. All right, and I'll get to the example. All right, and like I said, the first one we'll be using the Tableau's built-in box plot. And again, we go to the analytics pane, and right now this is grayed out because we already use it. So we have to do just right click and remove for now. And now we have a box plot option available. So all you have to do is just drag and drop. Voila. And it already shows us this box plot the option. And as we visually can see that this data point here, it's outlier. But here nothing looks like they're just on the line, so it's not the outlier. So physically we can visually can see this is just only outlier. And again, just since it's just 1 point, we can manually exclude them. But again, now we can also use the calculated way, and that's what I did. So now we're gonna use a little bit, a couple of their scan steps. The first we have to use the quartile 1, quartile 3. Then we're gonna get the upper fence and lower fence. The first we're gonna go the quartile 1, which will be using the Tableau has a built-in percentile formula. They gets the percentile of the first quartile. And all to do is just bring the sum of profits, and here the 25%. And quartile 3 will be 75%, or just you have to use a decimal. It's gonna be 75%, same formula. Then we have to use the IQR, will be difference between a quartile 3 and 1. That's gonna be the difference. And then we have to get the lower and upper fence. If you remember the way it does, you are adding to this is the quartile 3, you add a 1 time half of IQR. And to get the lower one, it's the same thing, except that you are using the quartile 1 here and minus 1/2 times of the IQR. And then to get the outliers, we are saying if the sum of profits are greater than the upper or the lower one will be the outlier. That's exactly what we're doing here. So we are saying that if the sum of profits is lower than the lower fence, or sum of profits are greater than the upper fence, they will be outliers. Anything else between, it will be normal. And when I bring them to the color, and that's what we're getting. That's going to be outlier just because it's above the upper fence and there's nothing on the lower fence. And again, we can exclude them using the formula. All right, the next will be, I'll be talking a percentile. It's a very straightforward one. So pretty much what it does do, anything falls outside the specific percentile, outside the percentile, above or below, it will be the outliers. And for this one, usually there's a 5th or 95th percentile, 1st and 99 percentile, or say like a 90 to 10 to 90%. So end of the day, they should add up to 100. All right, and it's very straightforward. And now I will be using the Tableau again. So again, we can use the Tableau's built-in distribution band. So again, we go to the analytics pane, go to distribution band, and make sure a table, and we are using the sum of profits. Now we go to computation and make sure you click here and use the percentile option, and you get the 1 percentile, 95th percentile. But again, what the method I'll be using, we're using the upper and lower percentile. So all you have to do is just click the drop down menu, and you can click here, enter 1 or 2 values. But again, usually they get 99, 95, 90%. But again, this is more subjective one. But for this Excel, I'll be using 99. So all you have to do right now, I have option to enter 1 percentile and 99 percentile. And voila. So what's really happening? It's calculating percentile for the whole data set, and looks like between the 1 and 90 percentile, this whole data. Anything about 90 percentile, this are that will be the outliers, and this one, the below the 1 percentile, will be the outliers too. But again, we can visually see and we can manually exclude them, but there is a way you can calculate this one, and we get there, and we can color them too. The first, again, Tableau has the built-in percentile formula available. So the one, if you remember that we did in the first and the prior one. So Windows percentile, the sum of profits, and we're using the decimal. So 1% will be 0.01, and we will be calculating the 99 percentile. It will be 0.99, the same formula, Windows percentile, and using sum of profits, and we're entering the decimal. And now the formula will be if the sum of profits are greater than the 99 percentile or below the 1 percentile will be outliers. Anything in between will be normal, and that will be the formula for it. So we're saying if it's sum of profit less than 1 percentile or sum of profits greater than 99 percentile will outliers. Anything in between will be normal. And we bring into the color, and that's all we get in this option. Again, we can exclude them quickly, and now this data shows only the normal, excluding the outliers. All right, and there's going to be something called z-score. It's very similar to the standard deviation. It just it calculated but differently. Just like you have to above the certain threshold. Usually they use 3 z-scores, and that's what the formula. I'm not getting, for sake of the timing, I'm not getting very deep into, but my worksheet has this the calculations available, and that's how the distribution will look like. So the anything about the 3 z-score, anything below the 3 plus or minus, above the 3 or below the 3, there will be outliers. All right, and how we will be handled in the outliers. The several ways we can do it. The first one, the obvious one, is to remove them. And this one, by removing the outliers, we're simplifying the data set, excluding the extreme or rare and their rare values. Just we did with the small case that we did together. And you can transform the outliers. They usually can be done by using mathematical transformation. It's by converting the logarithmic, or you can square root, and that's going to help me to transform outliers. So we are less sensitive to your data set will be less sensitive to the outlier. The input outliers, eventually you are replacing the outliers with some of the values. They can be a mean, median, stuff like this. And the fourth one is more of statistical method. I'm not getting into it. Eventually you are using statistical, which are less sensitive to outliers. All right, that's all my presentation for today, and I hope you find it very helpful. Again, this was just a short introduction to outliers, and I will be publishing my workbook on Tableau Public. You can go ahead and download it, and you can reverse engineer and see how I did it. You can follow me in the Tableau Public. You can follow me on the LinkedIn. I'm here, and if you don't have any question, that's all for today. Thanks so much. It was my pleasure to present today. Thank you.